Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer your emails. There are so many, and it's been a while since I've gotten to the general document that has all of the emails, and so I thought I would actually do a true lightning round in which I really tried to go as fast as I can. So this first question is actually from Discord. It's from Leslie, and they write, what do you think of imposter syndrome? Well, my answer to that is I think it sucks, but it's universal. Everyone has it. It's contextual. For example, I don't have it right now as I'm talking to you, but if I got a new job, I would have it. It involves often schemas for people who are treated as though they were incompetent growing up. They will have schemas of general incompetence about them, and so their proneness or susceptibility to imposter syndrome is much greater, and it will last longer. You could argue that dependent personality disorder is one giant imposter syndrome experience. There's a lot of research on imposter syndrome, that it gets in the way. There are ways to mitigate it, both personally and organizationally. For example, with my students, I try to remember to self-disclose more about my foibles and insecurities, particularly when I was at their phase. That helps them to feel like they're not an imposter. Many times after I disclose, and some of you listeners will even say that as well, that if I am human, then that somehow helps people to feel, because I think a big part of imposter syndrome is comparison. We look at our professors or our classmates or our coworkers, our colleagues, our friends, and people don't wear their insecurities on their sleeve. And so it just seems like everyone has it figured out. But of course, everyone's secretly hiding their insecurities. And so if someone, even a peer or someone that is in authority who is supposed to have it all figured out, talks about their insecurities, then that will mitigate and reduce other people's imposter syndrome. It never goes away completely, but I have seen a lot of sighs of relief when I self-disclose, and I try to remember to do that. Sometimes I just forget. Like toward the end of the quarter, I'll self-disclose something, and then everyone's like, "Oh my God, it was so great." I'm like, I should have done that earlier in the quarter. All right, this next email is from patron Carly from Columbus. She writes, "Hi, Dr. Honda. I adore your podcast. It has helped me so much as a first-year therapist who has been working in community mental health, providing individual psychotherapy. I recently got a new job working with families, and I'm very excited. However, my degree is in MSW, and I have no experience with MFT, marriage and family therapy. My company provides training in functional family therapy. I would love to hear your thoughts on functional family therapy and also any resources you recommend to a novice therapist interested in learning more about family therapy in general." End of email. Well, welcome to the field, Carly. I'm so glad that you're out there helping people. Regarding functional family therapy, I'll tell you my very limited experience, which is that when I used to do in-home family therapy with government contracts, I was basically free to do whatever I wanted to do as a therapist. And the government would just pay me to go into these houses, and the presenting problems were what they were, and I just did whatever I wanted to, and they trusted the therapist to do that, depending on the situation. If something bad happened, then of course they would stop giving people contracts. But I did that kind of work part-time, in addition to my regular private practice for a good 10 years or something for the first 10 years of my career-ish, maybe 7 years of my career. I learned a lot, and I could bore you to details in terms of like the evidence-based movement and the politicians that would try to clamp down on things. And I remember, and I don't know if this is actually what was happening, but it seemed as though there was some politician or some government worker that was getting a little rigid and a little controlling and heard about this thing called functional family therapy and decided to impose this model of therapy on other people. And all of a sudden on the scene were government contracts that were saying, we're going to stop giving the regular contracts as much, and we're going to start giving these other contracts called functional family therapy. And when there was this big movement to try to train all of us in-home family therapists to do functional family therapy. And so I started to go along with that. But as I looked into it and I started learning more about it, I was just like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I mean, it's fine, but it's not my style. And the style to me seemed extremely rigid. That is my impression, but I don't know how functional family therapy is used around the world. I particularly don't know how it's going to be used for you. Let me know how it goes, Carly. I hate to scare you away. But then you ask, what resources do I recommend a novice therapist interested in learning more about family therapy? I mean, I don't know where to begin, Carly. I would listen to all my episodes on systems theory and family therapy, but I would get a supervisor because it's weird. I mean, there's so much chaos and so much to consider and so much countertransference that you really need someone that is talking with you for at least an hour a week and guiding you. And this is a question, Carly, that I'll get from, from social workers or counselors or psychologists. They'll be like, hey, what should I thought I'd start working with families. What book should I read? And I'm like, you realize there's an entire degree dedicated to family therapy, right? It's 3.5 years plus of study and internship and supervision, and there's prereqs and there's post-graduation work. And now a lot of the skills you've learned in individual psychotherapy will translate, but not everything. So I would set out for a long-term kind of education process. All right, this next question is from a patron on Patreon. They write, I have a question about your favorite topic, identifying the client. Who is the client? I supervise clinicians that work in a school-based setting. We obviously have releases of information to communicate with the school staff. So what I've seen some people do in your position, supervisor at a school, you're a clinician supervisor supervising other clinicians in a school. One of the things that I will see people do is they will have clients sign a release of information to be able to talk with the entire school. So they'll have the 16-year-old sign this form, and it says, by signing this form, you're letting me talk with the school administrators and the school staff and the teachers. And I'm not a fan of that. It probably holds in a court of law, but it's not very fair, I think, because to the 16-year-old, they don't know exactly what they're signing, right? So I prefer, when I'm supervising people in a school setting, I will say, when you ask your 16-year-old to sign, or even a 9-year-old, and that's the other thing that I'll say, because some people say like, well, 9-year-olds, you don't need them to sign it. The parents can sign it. And I'm like, well, just because you don't need the 9-year-olds to sign it doesn't mean you disregard the 9-year-old's rights. I mean, you still, as a courtesy at the least, you should ask them if it's okay to disclose their information. And if they don't want you to disclose that information, you probably shouldn't if it's not necessary, or if it's on, if it's on the borderline there. But anyway, so I will say, you should say to the 16-year-old, is it okay if I talk to this particular person in your school about this particular thing? The reason why is because if you just have a student sign a blanket form, one, that might not stand if there's a complaint later on. And two, if you have them sign it, the student will not trust you. If you have now said, I have total permission to talk to literally everyone in the school, well, even if it's not against other people in the school, they're just like, well, I don't want to talk with you now. They might not know to say that. So our confidentiality is to benefit treatment. It's not some sort of weird technical rule that was given to us by the gods. It's we put that on ourselves, So but anyway, so you say you supervise people and you have releases to talk with the school staff. You go on. We frequently provide advice, support, and guidance to school staff. Something like, Johnny can become overstimulated in the noisy classroom. I recommend giving him noise-canceling headphones, etc. If we are going to help and advice, if we are giving help and advice to school staff, are they also the client? End of question. Yeah, so if you're supervising clinicians, patron, I recommend you get very buttoned up about this because you're in charge. I would get legal counsel, honestly. I mean, I don't know if you're working for an agency or something, but you should be talking with someone to have your informed consent forms all kind of worked out. But yeah, so to answer your question, you can have the school staff or the school as the client, and the families and the kids are also clients or maybe not clients. And it depends, right? So the key is that you have to know where your loyalties are, because we are loyal to our clients, right? When a client comes to us and gives us information, someone else from outside, if I'm treating Jane and Jane's husband, John, comes to me and says, I would like to know everything that Jane is telling you. Well, I am not loyal to John. I am loyal to Jane. and I have an obligation to Jane based on that loyalty. And that loyalty is important. It's important for the relationship. It's important for professionality. It's important for trust. And so everyone needs to know where your loyalties lie. So, and you have to know, one, where your loyalties lie, who is the client, how many people are in the client, and it's complicated. So from the sound of it, it's a typical configuration where the school and the families are the client, because it's not just the kid, right? Because you're often talking to the parents. So I'm guessing you're also advising the parents about what they should do with Johnny when he is at home. So you have the parents, the child, and the school. But are the teachers the client, or is everyone in the school the client? The staff, the principal, who's your boss? Who pays your bill? That's another thing to think about in terms of, that's not always what will dictate who the client is. Like when I'm treating someone, then they're using insurance, the insurance company isn't my client. But there's actually some debate about even that one. But anyway, so for example, in your informed consent, you have to tell the parents that although you are loyal to the child and to the parents, you are also beholden to the school and their interests, which means that conflicts of interest could happen, and they should be informed of that split loyalty or that potential loyalty issue up front before treatment begins, because you are a therapist, you are a clinician. And I find that when people work in schools, they start thinking and acting like they're teachers because the therapists in the school are often the minority. But that doesn't make any sense, right? Just because you're a therapist that works in the school doesn't mean that you're suddenly no longer beholden to your standard of practice, right? So you really have to hold the line with these schools, because they'll really get in under your skin. They'll really start to influence you, and you start acting more like an advisor or a teacher. And those are great, but stick to your role, stick to your lane. So you have to inform the families and the kid and the schools. Look, here is my role. Here is who I'm loyalty to. Here is what I would do in this hypothetical. For example, if the family decides to, you're treating a kid that's having a lot of troubles, and you also are working with the parents. And so the parents are also the client, because you're advising what the parents might do with the kid. You're advising the teachers and the principal, and you're advising about all sorts of things. You're advising about how to help this kid learn. You're giving information, the parents aren't really say the parents aren't following your recommendations. Are you going to tell the vice principal that, the principal that? Because the principal could actually use that against the parents, because now you're in a situation where the principal and the parents are against each other. Let's say the parents sue the school and the principal is involved in that. Well, whose side are you on? Because if you were the family therapist only, then you're on the family side. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to fight for them, but it means that if push comes to shove, you're there for the family. And I won't go into details on what that exactly means, but that's what it means. And so you have to, in all likelihood, what would happen is that you would probably actually stick up for the school or bow out of it entirely. And so everyone has to understand that right up front. So everyone also needs to understand, what are the boundaries of confidentiality when you're having the kids sign a release of information that allows you to talk with the school staff. What does that exactly mean? Does that mean that literally everything that the client tells you is potentially going to be told to the teachers and to the vice principal and to the custodian? All that has to be worked out. It gets very complicated, but you work it out. You work out the policies. You write it all out. You get consultation. You might have to talk to a lawyer, and you tell the parties involved about that up front. And not only just have them sign on the dotted line, but you tell them directly, and you might actually have to remind them of that. All right, speed round. Anonymous upper tier patron from Montreal, he writes, can you please talk about vorophilia as it pertains to a young teenager, for example, a 14-year-old male like my son? Is fantasizing and viewing vor videos on YouTube and writing about being eaten whole normal? So if you don't know what vorophilia is, or vor is, that it is pornography or cartoon pornography. It's a fetish with being eaten or living inside someone's belly, or eating other people or eating parts of other people or having an animal eat you. There's a bit of an overlap with furries in this way. And I talked about it a fair amount when we were talking about Armie Hammer, because he was accused of harming someone. And I think my conclusion about Armie Hammer was that although vor fetish individuals are fine, and a vor fetish is not a problem, it's just like any other kind of fetish and kink. People that engage in it are doing it with consensual adults, and they're not actually eating people. It's just fantasizing. Like, one of the things that people will do when they have this fetish and they have a partner that's not really into it is they will sublimate by fantasizing. Like, they'll say, can I listen to your stomach? So if the person with the fetish is listening to their partner's stomach, they can kind of fantasize about being inside their partner, and it can be comforting and or sexually arousing. And there's a lot of obvious stigma around kink in general, and particularly something like this, and it's not associated with any kind of danger, but it is associated with a fair amount of distress because there's so much shame and so much oppression about that. The thing about Armie Hammer was that he seemingly also had a problem with intimate partner violence and control and actually wanting to harm people without their consent, from my memory, in terms of the allegations. So it'd be like saying if someone was sexually assaultive in a very vanilla way, then somehow vanilla sex is disgusting and weird. It's like, no, I mean, just because the individual has a fetish and they also were harmful to other people, it's not associated with the kink, you understand? So, but I get that people would be very afraid of this because it just sounds so odd, and it's associated with all the sort of movies that we watch, but it's fine. So apparently your son has this fetish. You say, is fantasizing and viewing vor videos on YouTube and writing about being eaten whole normal? Is finding comfort in their quote unquote sticky warm bellies that they find themselves in all the while being sexually aroused, is that normal? Does this behavior need to be cured? Does it need to be addressed, altered? Is the teen mentally ill? Will he ever have a normal sex life? Does vorophilia degenerate into cannibalism? I am a father at his wit's end. I put on a calming and understanding front when my son told me, but inside I was dying for the poor kid. My son seems very confused and lost. I'm thinking because he is so quiet, introverted, passive, and has great difficulty making friends, that this is his way of merging with them and becoming worthy and present. Please shed some light. End of email. Yeah, well, to answer your question, does it need to be cured? No, it's fine. It's like any other kind of kink. And for some people, it can be the only way that they can be aroused, but it's all a matter of finding other people or ways of sublimating it that work for people. And if we didn't have as much kink shame, then it's fine. It's just like, 50 years ago when someone was gay, it's like, does that need to be cured? My kid is suffering. And it's just like, well, yeah, it's because we have a screwed up society. If we allowed kinks to exist, then they'd be able to talk about it and find each other. You know what I mean? You ask, is it normal? I mean, no, it's not normal, but it's certainly not a disorder. You ask, is your son mentally ill? No, he just has a kink. It's very well documented, shared by many. And then you say, does it degenerate into cannibalism? No, it does not. Can it? Sure. Could someone become a cannibal that wasn't into this fetish? Yeah, happens all the time. And you're at your wit's end. Well, one, he's 14, so God knows where his sexuality is going to go. I mean, that's all to say. Like, one anonymous upper tier patron from Montreal, I would talk with a specialist in kink and maybe even this sort of philia and get some comfort. I would also have your son talk with that person because it's important for all the reasons I'm saying. Now, you ask another question that your son seems very confused and lost. Well, that's probably not related, or it could be related, but that, of course, is something to be very concerned about. You're saying that he's passive and has difficulty making friends, and this might be his way of trying to merge with other people. Yeah, it could be. It could also just be that he was kind of born this way, that find a specialist in a kink-friendly therapist, or just Google YouTube videos on on Vor, people talking about their experiences. It's really mundane. It's just like any other human experience. When you hear enough stories, you're like, oh, this is just like, it's just boring. It's just, there's nothing scary about it. It's just another one of those things that people apparently have, and there's enough of people out there. So, I wouldn't worry about it. But I would worry about your son's difficulty making friends, his isolation, his quietness. That is, so if I were to wave a magic wand, I would say allow him to keep his sexuality and allow him to keep exploring that, but help him make friends and help him to feel good about himself, and then go from there. All right, this next question is from anonymous patron. They write, "Hello, Podwife and Dr. Kirk. You cite sometimes the John Gottman study that a good couple has a ratio of five good interactions to one bad one, and that is what would qualify a marriage as good or could last. But I was thinking, especially with the bad comments you have received about the trial or regarding William Osman, is there a study that looks into the ratio for online comments? I would assume that the number of goods would be much larger than bad to make up for it." End of email. Yeah, that is a fantastic question, anonymous patron. And that did not occur to me, but that question is brilliant. And I would imagine that a lot could be said about that. But off the top of my head, my first reaction is, yeah, I think the ratio and it's probably different for every content provider, but for me, I need it to be, I don't know, 100 to 1, not 5 to 1. That's for gosh darn sure. But it also just kind of depends on the context too, right? Like, because sometimes my video will have like 95% likes versus dislikes, which is, really high when you think about it. You say, wait, so 95% of the people that watch this, among those who actually decided to click the like or dislike, liked it. And you got to figure, if you disliked it, you probably definitely hit the dislike. But if you liked it, then you only maybe sometimes hit the like button. By the way, if you ever like even remotely one of my videos on YouTube, if you could click the like button, it's just kind of a little vote that tells me like how, what's the ratio here. And if you disliked it, then hit the dislike, right? So I'll get 95% likes, and then I look in the comments and every other comment is, or say, every third comment is negative. And I'll say, well, maybe it's just a higher percentage of people that dislike it will say something. And so sometimes that will help. But also, it depends on the context too, because I'm a therapist and I don't ever want to harm anyone, right? Like, even if it's just one person, it's not pleasant to me. So it depends, right? Now, the other thing is what's being said. The whole 5 to 1 ratio is a bit simplistic, obviously, because if you have 5 positive typical moments, like your partner listens to you and makes a joke or texts you in the middle of the day, little things, or kisses you when they come home or something. These are good moments. But then has one moment where they berate you and beat you to unconsciousness, then obviously that's not the same thing. It's not apples to apples at that point. So it depends on what exactly we mean by bad and good and what we mean by a moment, right? Because you could consider the abusive incident to involve 13,000 incidents, because there were all the different things you said. There were, every time you hit the person, there was a look on your face. So it's kind of hard to code. When John Gottman and colleagues were coding, they were watching people just hang out at home, basically. They were just watching people in very mundane activities as they were interacting while they were making dinner or watching TV, these kinds of things. So, and what they found was that if the ratio was at least 5 to 1, positive to negative, then that predicted the relationship would still be, intact a number of years later, and also indicating satisfaction would be retained. So, yeah, it's a great question, and it makes me think like, well, what if all of those people that were commenting, if they were all one person, right? Because that's really another thing, right? If they were all one person, would I want to be in a relationship with them? The first answer is no, because like if my wife said, hey, great episode, great episode, great episode. And then every so often was just like, even if it was just one out of every 50 episodes or something, and my wife was just like, you ruined my life with that episode. You are the worst, dumbest person on the planet. You understand it's not the same as the John Gottman study, right? All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Anonymous listener wrote in, someone that I've communicated a lot with over email. She says, last week I spoke to my father for the first time in my life, and I'm almost 27 years old. I've been feeling very untethered and on the verge of tears ever since. And I had thought the conversation would be very confrontational, but it was just sort of polite. I feel ashamed, but I keep wishing he'd reach out to me again and we could talk every day. I've thought about calling, but I don't want to be the only one trying to make contact. If I hadn't reached out initially, who knows how many more years would have gone by. And that makes me feel pretty shitty. He had the ability to call me, but never did. I suppose I have a lot of material for therapy next week. End of email. Yeah, you do have a lot of material for therapy for maybe a lifetime. What an intense experience you're going through. You talked with your father for the first time in your life and you're 27 years old. I mean, holy shnikes, that is intense. Intense. I mean, it's kind of intense to talk to our parents at any time. They mean a lot to us usually. But the first time, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I got a new bug zapper. I don't know if is it inhumane? Because when Stacy's outside with the dogs, because when I'm in here podcasting, she's out there because the dogs like to go to the bathroom and roam around in their backyard, and she sits out there with them because she's scared a coyote's going to jump over the fence. And it's actually kind of comical because she bought one of those, there's these coats that you can put on the little dog, and they make him look like punk rockers with all these spikes sticking out. So I got this bug zapper because all these mosquitoes were getting her. We're also concerned about mosquitoes because our big dog actually had heartworm, which is transmitted by mosquitoes, and it could have killed him, and he was on this very intensive months-long treatment program that he just got over actually, and he doesn't have heartworm anymore. He's a rescue from Louisiana, so because it's not common to have heartworm up in the Northwest. Because anyway, point is I don't know if you can hear that zapper just going off, and then I guess I keep thinking, is it inhumane to just kill the bugs? But I don't know. It just seems like so. Intense experience. You talk to your dad for the first time, and you say that you feel ashamed, but you keep wishing that he reach out to you again so you can talk every day. Why do you feel ashamed of that? Of course you feel that way. He's your freaking father. And it was a nice conversation, and it was polite, and you want to get into it. You got a lot of things to get off your chest, and there's a super amount of intensity there, and then you say that you've thought about calling, but you don't want to be the only one trying to make contact. And, I get that too, but I don't know, life is short, anonymous listener. And if we operate by that principle of just like, well, I don't want to be the one that's always, it's like you'll be on your deathbed, you'll just be like, I'm so happy that I never reached out to people and took any risks, like for me, there'll be times in my life when it's totally one-sided, and I'm really just hurt that I'm the only one initiating any kind of contact with a friend or a family member or something. But then I think, well, it's fine, I guess, because the premise is like they don't want to hang out with me, but I know that they do. I don't know that they do, but they always do. They just don't initiate things, or they're procrastinator, or maybe they're a little depressed, or I don't know, or they don't want to assume, or I don't know what's going on. But I don't want to live my life always second guessing that kind of stuff, and I never really have, and I've enjoyed that approach to life of just like, I'm going to be the one to initiate. So initiate. Let's say he literally never reaches out to you, and you're the only one that ever reaches out to him, but he enjoys it every time that you do that. So c'est la vie. But yeah, I mean, the fact that he never reached out to you and might not ever have reached out to you if you hadn't reached out to him. Yeah, I get, but people, they get into their heads around shame, and the years go by, and I imagine that for your father, there's a tremendous amount of shame and guilt and longing and missed opportunity and I'm sure he's really proud of you. I'm sure you're a very well put together person, and I'm sure that he wishes things would have been different. So, but yeah, I get it. And yeah, you have a lot to talk about, and all your feelings are normal, and it makes total sense you want to talk to him all the time, and it makes sense you feel untethered and you're on the verge of tears. I mean, it's intense. All right, lightning round with the Discord questions. Laura said, all the way back in April, so you've been waiting 3 or 4 months for me to answer. You say, since she doesn't feel comfortable coming on the podcast, would Stacy do a Discord AMA? With such a big role behind the scenes, it'd be nice to hear a bit from her and what she thinks, and thank her directly for her part in keeping this community going. Yeah, I'll ask her. I'm guessing she won't want to do that either. She's a mixture of interesting qualities. She's an enigma in that in some ways she's very unshy, and in other ways she is extremely shy. As an example, she is an artist and submits her art to contests and galleries and stuff, and she almost always wins a top prize in whatever contest she enters out of hundreds of submissions, because her art is very good. And another aspect of her art is that she's always in it. She takes pictures of herself. So just go to Instagram, Stacy Honda. It's beautiful work. It's not very, you can never see her face, so it seems a bit anonymized, but it is still her. Now, I think she would take pictures. Well, I don't know. So on one hand, you're like, wow, that's very unshy. You're taking pictures of yourself. You're blowing these pictures up in, very large fashion. You're submitting them. You're posting it on. That's very non-shy, right? But when we were at the at a local art festival, the Edmonds Art Festival, it's this really great festival, big festival, local, just north of us actually, where we live, and she had won first place. And they had allowed 4 of her submissions to be displayed, which is actually pretty rare. They usually just pick 1, but she had 4 large pieces, and it really dominated this one wall in the art show. And she had won first place, and so we walk up there, and we're like, oh, there's the ribbon, and all the people around, and the day when the day of the art show. The weekend, and she sees that on 2 of the pieces, because she framed them herself, that the non-glare wasn't really working, and you could kind of see a little bit of glare from the overhead lights on the glass in front of her art. I mean, that was all she could focus on. Now, I get that as a perfectionist myself, but I mean, she was sweating. So on one hand, she's displaying herself, 4 large pictures, heavy, big pictures, probably, 4 feet across by 4 feet or so. Very much all about her art, DDD. On the other hand, she's just absolutely terrified that some people might be seeing a little bit of glare, and she could not let go of that. And she was sweating profusely, literally, because she just was like, oh my God, our people are looking at my art and they'll know it was me. I had her stand in front of the art, and I was taking a video of her and pictures. I posted on Instagram, and she was just, sweating through her shirt. So anyway, I would love it if she would do an AMA, and I'll ask her, but I just can't see herself doing that. Nini, good old Nini, says, Dr. Kirk, since you're a history nerd, do you think there was any slavery before people became sedentary? End of question. By sedentary, do you mean agricultural, like when they started to settle down into small civilizations? I don't know what you mean by sedentary, because usually when we say sedentary, we think of the 20th century and us sitting all the time at work. But if you're talking about agricultural wise, then I don't know. Slavery, if you know anything about history, is more the rule than the exception. Pretty much every society at some point in their history had slaves, or at least were enslaved by a neighboring civilization on every continent and in all parts of history. So if you're asking, was slavery in existence before we became agricultural? I don't know. Maybe someone knows the answer to that question, but I could see it. But I could also see that it didn't happen because when you have slaves, you might actually need a civilization where there's specialization in jobs, where you have someone that has to train the slaves or kind of deal with the slaves. I don't know. But could I imagine that 100,000 years ago, there was a tribe of people that went to war with a neighboring tribe and stole someone and made them work? Yeah, it probably did happen, but who knows? Well, someone probably knows, or someone probably has a hypothesis or even archaeological evidence, but I don't. All right, lightning round. Eleanor says, how can having OCPD negatively affect relationships, romantic, friendships, and family? Well, you can listen to my whole deep dive on that for more information, but the long and short of it is that people with OCPD can, because of their perceptual distortions, they can think that everyone else is a problem because they're not very orderly, and the OCPD individual can deal with that by becoming very controlling and very harsh in their language and critical of other people. It can also affect others, and their rigidness can really bother other people, can get in the way of other people. Like, if someone has OCPD and they want to be on time and they're yelling at everyone to get to the airport and ruining all their relationships, it can affect it that way. Also, people with OCPD can be extremely principled, overly principled, where they are extremely rigid about rules, the do's and the don'ts of life or of a particular thing. And they can impose that on everyone else as if it's some sort of fact when it's not necessarily a fact. So yeah, there's a variety of ways in which OCPD can ruin relationships. Oh, and let's not forget hoarding. A lot of people with OCPD can hoard in a variety of ways. And obviously that can absolutely ruin people's lives that are around them. Alex says, good old Alex says, since you're now on TikTok, will you be interacting or collaborating with other TikTok therapists? Again, this was asked all the way back in April when I first started going on TikTok. Will I be collaborating with other TikTok therapists? Probably not. I mean, I'd love to, but I do not have the time. I don't have the time to do the stuff I'm doing now. There's so many things on the list. There's so many shows I want to watch and deep dives I want to do. So I doubt that I would collaborate with other TikTok therapists, but who knows? Well, I guess we'll see what happens. I just wish there were like 5 of me. Scarabello said, what did you want to do when you grew up when you were a very small child? I wanted to be a rock star. That didn't happen. Yeah. I wanted to be an astronomer. I was obsessed with astronomy, and I still am. When I am on YouTube and I'm watching things just recreationally, which is what I do late at night, half of what I watch is astronomy videos. Astrophysics, dark energy, black holes, space-time continuum, Einstein, relativity, fusion, fission, planets, the probes, the Oort cloud, all the different satellites, the James Webb Deep Space Telescope. I just love that stuff. But I'll tell you, and I've told this story in the podcast before, what turned me off ultimately was we had like career day when we were in 9th grade or something. And I feel like I grew up in a time when no one really talked with kids about careers, because me and my friends, I don't remember any of us thinking about a career. We were just completely left to our own devices. And I feel like kids today, it's just like they're immediately thinking about college and career, like when they're in kindergarten. But so I remember at career day at school, and I was looking at, we had these 3-ring binders with all the professions. Imagine that. It's like the Wikipedia of jobs that you could have was in this set of like 10 3-ring binders, and every page was a different profession, and they were even laminated, I think. And so I looked up astronomer, and it had this listed. It said how many jobs open up in the United States every year, and it said 1 or 2, which I find to be probably an underestimation. They're probably just talking about like tenured professors or something. I'm not sure, but I said, and it said the reason why the jobs open up is because either an astronomer retires or they die. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound very pleasant to have to wait for someone to die so I can get a job. So I started thinking about becoming a writer, and that lasted a brief moment of narcissistic teenage year. And then I decided to become an engineer, and then I went to college, and I took 1 week of engineering school, and although liked it and was doing well, I just thought, I don't want to be an engineer. It just doesn't seem to fit with my personality. And then, the rest kind of happened. Grinning Cat asked, can I assume that all babies that have been operated on before the mid-1980s have suffered serious trauma? I just saw a clip mentioning that babies didn't receive any anesthetic because the assumption was they couldn't feel pain. I'm so shocked. I don't know the answer to that. I would have to see the research on it. And I don't even know if that claim is true, but it does sound like the way people used to think, and probably still do to some extent. But not every child had surgery, you understand? I mean, also, receiving an anesthetic can also be traumatic to a kid. I've worked with teenagers and adults who have residual trauma because they had a complicated medical issue when they were very young and they were in and out of the hospital. And even though the parents and the physicians and the nurses and the staff, everyone was super cool to the kid and was doing everything they could to make the kid feel comfortable, it's still extremely uncomfortable and probably traumatic, right? So it's one of those things that is not often talked about because, what are you supposed to do? You can do what you can, but it's going to be scary to the kid and it's going to be annoying. And if you have ever been a parent of a kid who has had to go through that at a young age, it's heartbreaking because even if you explain to the kid, it's just like, this is going to make you better. Some kids are just like, but I don't want to do this. Don't make me do it. And you're fighting against your own kid to force them into surgery, into the hospital, because it's going to save their life. And you also have to, tell your kid potentially like, this is a serious illness. It's just something you don't want to have to deal with your kids. And it's really rough. So even with anesthesia, that doesn't necessarily mitigate any of that. All right, good old Alex says, can a therapist also be a fiction writer? What precautions should they take? Well, Alex, I'm sure that question was answered for you when you're listening to Bob talk about his book. Can they be a fiction writer? Yeah, a therapist can do pretty much anything they want within reason. And, they can go on Tinder and they could be naked during the solstice parade here in Seattle. And there's this naked bike ride race in Seattle. And I remember when it first started, like, I don't know, maybe the 90s or something. And it was just like maybe 7 people on their bikes would be naked and they would paint themselves or wear costumes. And they were always this, there's one of the elements of this parade. Well, the last time I was at the solstice parade in Seattle and Fremont, the sheer number of naked people on bikes in the parade was so numerous that I was watching the naked people, as they're going by, which sounds funny as I say it out loud. And then I got bored because it was taking a long time and because I thought, that surely this will end. So I got in line to get food at one of the food trucks nearby. It was a long line and I got to the front, ordered, waited for my food, got my food, ate my food on the curb, stood up, went back to the parade, and it was still, the naked people were still going by. It's like a several mile long train of naked people on bikes, So anyway, point is if you're a therapist, you can do that too. You just have to think about the ethical implications and try to account for them. All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Upper tier patron Nicole from Atlanta, she writes, thanks to your podcast, therapy, reading, and taking 2 different attachment quizzes, I'm pretty certain that I have anxious attachment style. In the past, I've had many casual relationships and situationships that have been bad for my self-esteem and made me feel I'm not lovable and that love is out of reach for me. So now that I'm equipped with attachment theory, I'm trying to avoid people with avoidant attachment. Guys will message me saying they like me or will go out for coffee and then they'll tell me they want to have sex, but they're not looking for anything serious. So I'll tell them I'm looking for something more serious and we should not see each other anymore. So they'll either say, okay, but then text me you up after midnight, or they'll keep pushing for friends with benefit situationship that I told them I'm not interested in. It's very annoying to me. Can this behavior be explained by attachment theory? End of question, or end of email. Well, Nicole, lots to say, but hard to know. And first off, I think one of the things you're running into is just a common thing that it has been happening maybe more lately, but I think it's always been happening, that when you're dating, it's hard to find someone that coincides with your goals and coincides with what you're looking for. So it's just hard, right? Just keep asserting yourself. You know your attachment style, and I like that you're avoiding avoidance, which is good. But you're looking for people that are secure, essentially, right? You're like, I don't want to date avoidant men, but I want to find a securely attached man. Finding someone that's avoidant isn't necessarily going to doom you. If you find someone that's avoidant but knows they're avoidant, then that can work and has recovered some. What you want to find is someone in therapy. You could find someone who's disorganized and make it work because they've recovered and they're aware. Bob, for example. I think what you're asking is there some conclusion you can make about these men who are not looking for anything serious, and then when you're like, well, I am, so let's not date, and then they text you at midnight. I don't know if you can say anything about their attachment style. I think all you can really say is that they want to have a situationship with you, and they're probably drunk after midnight, and you're probably not the first person that they texted. So, I mean, I'm not saying that to insult you. I'm just saying if they're texting you, probably mostly knowing you're not going to be into it, they probably tried other avenues with other people prior to that moment. Just keep plugging away and try not to take it personally. You know what I mean? Like if you are preoccupied, anxious, attached, you might consider this some sort of indication about who you are, right? Some sort of reflection of your worth or something. And, please don't do that. It's just, they're making a request and you're just telling them you don't want to do that. Now, of course, the larger issue here is sexism and entitlement that a lot of men will exhibit, and also toxic masculinity around men who probably want to have relationships and settle down, but they feel like it's counter to being the ideal male to do that sort of thing, and also to pour all of their relational and sensual needs into sexuality instead of just saying, hey, you want to cuddle, you want to hug, you want to talk. I'm just looking for, I suspect that a lot of these guys, when they're texting you after midnight, they're not necessarily looking for sex. They're looking for someone to hug them. They're looking for someone to fall asleep with. They're looking for someone to wake up in the morning with and go to breakfast. If you really think about these kinds of hookup culture aspects, and if aliens watched the hookup culture happen, they probably wouldn't categorize it as a sexual encounter entirely, right? They would say, well, clearly what's happening between these two people is they talk, they flirt, they sleep together, they have a meal together, they watch TV together, they joke around together. Oh yeah, and they also had sex. There's a lot of things that happen, and it doesn't mean that you do it, of course. It just sounds like you don't want to do it. But anyway, so there's a lot of things, sexism-wise, misogyny-wise, entitlement-wise, privileged-wise, that might also be going on that you're bumping up against that is annoying you, which, makes total sense. And frankly, it's just gross. Like if I had a guy friend that was we were having beers and it was 1 a.m. and he's like, oh, I'm going to text Nicole from Atlanta. I'm gonna text upper tier patron Nicole from Atlanta, and I was like, how do you know she's an upper tier patron? And then I would also say, well, why do you know her? Like, is this a thing? Like, do you guys hook up sometimes? And if he was like, well, we went out. I liked her, and she seemed to like me, and we went to coffee, and she said she wanted a relationship. She didn't want friends with benefits. So. But I don't know. I mean, she's really hot, and I want to meet up with her. I'd be like, well, don't text her, pal. Like, you're drunk, and just don't. Like, it sounds like she's not into it, so don't bother her. You don't want to. You're gonna put her in a weird position. It's not gonna feel good. So just if you want to text her like, hey, I'm thinking of you, but I don't want to hook up. could we talk on the phone, or could we text for a second? I'm just looking for some contact. Then, go ahead and do that. Or have you ever thought that maybe you're longing for a relationship a little bit more than you realize, All right, this next email, upper tier patron Georgia from Australia. She says, I've been in therapy for nearly 2 years and to treat anxiety and major depressive disorder. While it helps, she has not provided me with a clear diagnosis. And I find that we really struggle in focusing on my therapeutic goals. How do you know if your current therapist can't help you reach your goal? End of email. Well, upper tier patron Georgia from Australia, what I am hearing is that you are experiencing tension and a lack of satisfaction regarding the alliance. The alliance, the therapeutic alliance, according to research, depends on 3 things. It's understanding of the goals and the tasks to reach that goal or those goals, and also a bond that bonds the client and the therapist together. So what you're experiencing is that first, and probably by extension the second. So 2 out of the 3 elements of the therapeutic alliance you do not feel confident about or solid about, because you're saying you struggle with focusing on your goals. You don't even, it sounds like you don't even know what the goals are. And if you don't know what the goals are, and you haven't had them established or at least clarified recently, then how would you possibly know why you're there and what you're doing to get there? So you're having that tension, and I would absolutely bring that up and just say, hey, I want to talk about goals, and I also feel like it's hard for me to know what's happening, because I feel, I don't know if this is what you're saying, Georgia, but it could be that you're feeling like, am I just wasting my time? Because I like coming to you, but I don't know exactly what we're doing. And it's imperative that your therapist explain that to you. Now, it's possible that your therapist will say, well, my style of therapy is not to focus on diagnoses like anxiety or major depressive disorder. I'm here to help with your general growth as a human being and to listen to you and validate you. And I find that helps with this, this, and this, and probably will help your anxiety and depression. So there's that. The other thing is, if you're still suffering from anxiety and depression and you haven't been getting help for that, but she's helping you with other things, then yeah, by all means, bring that up. All right, next question, upper tier patron Dr. Bonnie. She says, I grew up with an alcoholic mother. For example, she would sit on the stairs with a baseball bat waiting for my dad to come home. And later I married a man who cheated on me. I kicked him out twice for being abusive and intimidating. But I'm a dentist and I am a very educated woman, and I don't know why I have even put up with this. After 40 years of marriage, I am feeling very hopeless and need some direction to find out who I am. End of email. Well, first off, Dr. Bonnie, upper tier patron Dr. Bonnie, I'm so sorry you're going through this and have gone through a lifetime of abuse. That is truly awful. You deserved better on a number of levels. So sorry you went through that. And you also are, I think, asking how to approach it, I guess. And what I'll say is therapy, right? Does it mean that you leave him? I don't know. But you're saying that you want to find out who you are, which is a great question. It's very wise of you to have that question, because in all likelihood, that's at the core. Who are you? What do you think? How do you feel? When you grow up with abuse, we often will move into abuse in our adult life with our partners. And when we do that, we're always surviving, and no one ever is taking care of us enough to want to know how we feel and what we want. And so we've never had a chance to know that. And how do we, like a lot of people with you, Dr. Bonnie, would say, well, why don't you leave him? Well, to leave him means that you would know what you want. And to leave him means that you would know what to do after you left him. And if you don't know who you are and what you want, then where do you go? Is leaving him the right answer? What do you want afterwards? Who are you? These are important questions, and therapy is the really only recommended way that I would say to search for that. You want to find a specialist. You would ask someone, if I wanted to explore who I was and how I felt, how would you approach that? And if the answer is satisfactory to you, then I would pursue that. The other thing you say here is you say, I'm a dentist and a very educated woman, and you don't know why you've put up with it. Education and profession has nothing to do with this. So the idea that somehow being abused or having a chaotic, abusive marriage for 40 years somehow means that you're uneducated and not successful in your career is a total stereotype. This sort of thing knows no bounds when it comes to class or profession or education. So you deserve a lot of therapy, and you need that, and you deserve it. All right, next email, upper tier patron Janie from Bryn Mawr, Washington, which I've never heard of before, so I'm going to Google that here. And it is it's Skyway. Why don't you just call it Skyway, Janie? Everyone I know refers to that area of South Seattle, Renton, as Skyway. But you're calling it Bryn Mawr, and apparently so does Google. Why do they call it Bryn Mawr? It's Skyway. Come on, people. Anyway, I was watching your coverage of the Depp Heard trial, and I realized that I may have borderline. It makes me so sad thinking I may have this disorder, having severe abandonment issues and anxious attachment. I'm sad because I had an ex-boyfriend who I fell madly in love with. In the beginning, I wasn't really expecting anything, but when things started progressing, I became jealous and possessive of him, wanting to know where he went and who he was spending time with, freaking out when he was with his female friends, etc. I decided to put a stop to it 6 years ago and move on with someone else, and I'm now with my current boyfriend. I realized, though, that I still love my ex-boyfriend. I feel that I have to break up with my current boyfriend because it's unfair to him that I have unresolved feelings for my ex. What do you think I should do? In one of your videos, you mentioned that borderline personality disorder people often have longing and some intense feelings towards an old partner even after years of being apart. How would you suggest dealing with these feelings? My ex did trigger me a lot, good and bad triggers. How do I let go of my ex, and how do I heal myself? I don't really know how to deal with the unresolved feelings. I have been in agony this past week because I'm so heartbroken about my ex-boyfriend. It's really painful. P.S. I am trying therapy through BetterHelp to resolve my childhood trauma and help deal with the feelings I have in my current relationships. End of email. Well, Janie, I can never answer a question like this where you're asking me what I should do because I don't know. If your situation was more cut and dry, maybe I could say something. But, if you're asking, should you break up with your boyfriend? I don't know. You would have to look inside of yourself for that, and maybe it'll take a while to figure that out. It's not uncommon. If you're asking me, should you try to get back with your ex-boyfriend? Again, I don't know. There's no way anyone could know the answer to that question. What I will tell you is that you're at the very beginning, Janie, of potentially years, decades of insight building and healing corrective experiences regarding the abandonment traumas that you've been through that have developed into the jealousy and the possessiveness that you experienced before. So regardless of what you do, really, it's the main thing is that you focus on the healing. Now, I know that doesn't really give you much contentment or satisfaction in the moment, but there's a chance that you won't have any satisfaction because of the intense feelings that you have as a result of your ongoing pain and abandonment traumas that are being triggered. It's common for all of us to focus on like, well, what do I do? Should I break up? Should I? And from 1,000 feet in the air, I can look, not me, but, for the perspective, if you and me were to look at yourself from 1,000 feet in the air, then what we would see is like, well, it doesn't really matter, because if you say you wrote a longer email, I didn't read the whole thing. You said that you realized you didn't love your ex-boyfriend. And so, say you stay with him. Well, that could be a good thing because it sounds like it's not as volatile. But maybe it would be a bad thing because you're not really in love with him. And maybe it's a bad thing that you're kind of emotionally cheating on him by still being in love with someone else. Or maybe you're just having residual grief and longing for a past boyfriend. That happens sometimes. It's human to do that. Even if it's 6 years later, it's fine. It just matters what you do with it, right? So
there's a lot to say. The other thing I'll say is that it's common for people with borderline, with preoccupied attachment, to fall in love deeply with people that trigger you. You mentioned in your longer email that your ex-boyfriend was avoidant. And it's possible that, say you did get back with your ex-boyfriend and you spend the next 5 years in therapy and in relationship with this fella. And at the end of that 5 years, you've significantly recovered and have a lot more insight. There's a chance that you actually won't love him anymore because you realize that the intense feelings you feel aren't really love related. It's more longing and being triggered related. So there's that. The fact that he avoids and is always just out of reach of you could actually engage your preoccupation, which you're confusing for love. And that'll happen a lot. So, and I kind of hear it in your language. You're like, he triggers me in good and bad ways. So I can imagine the bad ways that he triggers you through avoidance and not reassuring you. But the good ways is you might actually feel a lot of chemistry with him. Now, there's a chance that you just have chemistry with him, and there's nothing wrong with that or pathological about that. Now, there's a chance you get back with your ex and you have chemistry, but the two of you go to couple therapy and individual therapy, and not only do you have the benefit of the chemistry, but you also have the benefit of not engaging in the pursuer distance relationship that you had. That's asking a lot of him potentially, and you don't even know if he wants to get back together with you. But I would suspect that if you actually do have borderline, then the answer to less suffering is long-term therapy. It is probably not related to who should I be with right now. So now, who should you be with? That's an important question. But I think the emotions you're feeling, the longing, the pain, and also another thing is like, if you were listening to me talk about the trial and you, because of that, you're like, wait, maybe I'm borderline. You are at the very beginning of a very complicated process. And I would take it slow, and I would talk with your therapist. I think with BetterHelp, you could talk with your therapist every day, right? So, I'd be really making use of that. And I would find a support group. I would find support groups online. I would find maybe other people with borderline that you can talk to, and you maybe someone who's further down the road with recovery. You're really at a wonderful new phase of your life in all likelihood. It probably will have a lot of bumps in the road, and it'll feel like, what should I do? And the other thing that I would sort of throw out there is you're literally asking me, a podcaster, what you should do with your life. Which I'm not ridiculing you about. I get it, and I'm honored. But it points to that either you don't have other people to talk to about this, and or two, you don't have an inner guidance system that you're in connection with. So that's another whole part of this, right? For people with borderline, they were denied the opportunity to develop that sense of who I am and what I want. And so that's a whole other part to this. Say I did tell you what to do. Well, that's not you doing it. That's me doing it. So you need to be the one doing it. But the fact that you don't know what to do is something to work on. And there could be a lot of distress in that moment. I've talked with people at your phase for years. They literally don't know what they feel and don't know what they want. And slowly over time, that emerges, that sense of who they are. People with borderline will feel empty. They're not empty. You have emotions, you have needs, you are a person, you have an identity. You were just never allowed to build a fast pathway to that. Think of it like on the other side of the forest is you, but your conscious mind, it can't find your way through the forest. So you have to forge that trail. And the first time you do that, you just kind of tamp down a little bit of the bush, with a machete. But then every time you travel from your conscious mind into your needs and your feelings, the trail gets more and more worn. But you have to do it over and over and over again. And this actually does track onto our theories and our knowledge of brain science, that you have, what fires together wires together. And you just keep going back there. What do I want? And people ask you, what do I want? Who am I? How do I feel? What do I want? And you just keep forging that trail. And then eventually it's this wide open highway and you're in constant connection, but it takes a while. So you're there. And so when you're like, what do I do? What do I do? You're standing there in the forest and you don't know which way to walk. And you're asking me, what should you do? But I don't know, because the needs you have and the feelings you have and the wants you have, you think they don't exist because you don't see them, but they are there. And so you through therapy, you have to find them. I've never had a client who didn't start to build that connection. And it's a glorious thing, but boy, does it have complications. Because the first sort of inklings of getting in connection with the self, people start realizing it's sort of like, using the metaphor, they emerge out of the woods into this town and they see a sign of an indication of who they are. And they're like, and it's one sign, like it's a sign that says, I don't like my job. And then they come to therapy with me, like, I just connected with a part of myself and I figured out I hate my job, so I'm going to quit. And I'll say like, okay, well, if you want to, but are you sure you want to quit? And so when we start really talking about it, they realize that they're not really quite sure. They're just kind of giddy that they found something that they connected with. Another common one is, they emerge into the town of who they are and they see a sign that they never really asked themselves if they actually wanted to marry their spouse. So they think, maybe I shouldn't be with my spouse. And they'll come to therapy and be like, I discovered, like, never was I asked, or did I ever ask myself, do I want to be with this person? And they'll say that I think maybe I should divorce my husband or something. And I'll say, if you want to, absolutely. But there's a good chance that you're just at the beginning phase of getting to know who you are. And when we continue to explore it, there might be more nuance to that feeling. And usually there is. Not always, but usually there is. So it's complicated. It takes a long time. And I'm so happy you're going on that journey, Janie from Bryn Mawr, otherwise known as Skyway, Renton. And by the way, I have an affinity for Skyway. I was born near Skyway at Valley General, which is just across the valley right there. And I also, when I worked as an in-home therapist, I had a fair amount of clients in that area. There's Skyway, which is a lot of residential places, but also there's down the hill towards South Seattle, like the where the Kobodo Garden is, and but specifically that high school. Oh, what's that high school there? Henderson, Rainier Beach, yeah. And also there was a great Italian restaurant, I don't think it's there anymore, called Vince's. There was a Red Apple grocery store, I don't know if it's there anymore. And I remember it was known for playing extremely loud, annoying, like classical music in their parking lot because they didn't like people loitering in the and I just remember these loudspeakers play. I think it was classical. They were playing some sort of really annoying music that they figured kids of today wouldn't want to listen to. All right, next email, upper tier patron Allie from the Midwest. I won't read the first part of her email, but she talks in a very eloquent way about how the podcast has helped her. And I've never heard it described that way before, Allie. And I like that. In part of your email, you're just like, the podcast feels like home to you. It makes you feel like you're at home because it helps you understand your emotions. And that's great. I've never heard it described that way. It makes you feel like you're home. I think that is fantastic. It warms my heart, honestly. You go on to say, through stints with therapy and exploring resources such as your content, I discovered that not only do I have ADHD and anxiety, I could also be on the spectrum of OCPD. For example, I may have spent an hour writing and rewriting this email. And I also probably have narcissism. I have always struggled with feeling simultaneously worthless and priceless, fluctuating dramatically between the two. Additionally, I have a disorganized attachment style and Butler syndrome, as Bob puts it. it seems a bit counterintuitive to me as a layman that Butler syndrome and narcissism can coexist. Can you explain a bit about the relationship or lack thereof of these two? End of question. Yeah, upper tier patron Allie from the Midwest. That is a fantastic question and one that I don't often get a chance to talk about, so let me briefly talk about it. I will often say that at the foundation of narcissism, or what do I say? Where do I start? At the foundation of avoidant attachment is a preoccupied person. And at the foundation of a narcissistic person is a borderline person. So when you talk about, and you're not saying you have borderline, but maybe more broadly, at the foundation of a narcissistic person is someone who feels worthless. And so the difference for you, Allie, is that you just know it. So you're kind of better off than most people suffering from narcissism. You can feel yourself fluctuating between your assumption of who you are, which is worthless, to your defense, which is to feel priceless. And for a lot of people suffering from narcissism, they have such a hard time. They might feel that fluctuation, but they have such a hard time acknowledging it and admitting it that they just never acknowledge it or admit it. So you are better off in a lot of ways. So like for me, for example, I'm mildly on the spectrum myself. I'm much more OCPD than I am narcissistic, but I'm not particularly OCPD, which means I'm really not particularly narcissistic. But when I think about by narcissism, it's very similar, that I will act priceless at times, as you put it, but I know it's a reaction to feeling worthless. I don't feel particularly worthless, but again, it's maybe one way to put it is like all of us feel kind of worthless, right? And all of us have a defense against that, and mine is to be slightly narcissistic and to take up a lot of space and to delude myself that somehow I'm special or better or something. But I know that I don't feel that way. I know that that's not really what's happening. It's just this delusion that I'm trying to convince myself of, you know what I mean? So, but I think more fundamentally, in terms of my kind of ongoing daily issue, it's the OCPD part, the perfectionism, the flaw shame, all that kind of stuff. All you had to do was pay attention to the way I was reacting to the negative comments I was getting to realize that, it would make anyone feel bad, but because I would contact other content providers during the trial and I'd be like, how are you dealing with this? And they'd be like, well, I don't know. I just don't read the comment. I'd be like, oh, but I wish I was like you. Allie, you're doing great. You realize you have disorganized attachment style. You realize you have the Butler syndrome. You realize that you have a defensive structure for defending against the worthlessness. You've been made to feel worthless. You realize that you're a little OCPD because I'm guessing you went through a lot when you were a child, right? Very young child. And the way to put it is that you developed anxiety as a result because you were probably neglected to some extent and had to resort to your own devices when you were young. And so, the fact that you have OCPD and narcissism and not borderline, histrionic, that kind of thing, it points to a general neglect when you were 0 to 3. And with that general neglect, you can develop both narcissism because you have to depend on the self, right? And also OCPD because you're being given this notion that somehow if you weren't disorderly as a 2-year-old child, then you would get more of your needs met. You know what I mean? Because, 2-year-old children, there's a lot of disorder to their lives that parents will react against. And the message can often be from parents. It's like, if you weren't so disorderly, if your diaper wasn't dirty or if you were cleaner or you put your toys away. And, it's not always the message exactly that's being told to the child that has them, gives them the opportunity to develop OCPD. But you know what I'm saying? So you have perfectionism / OCPD that grew out of that. You had a narcissistic defense that you resorted to that helps you to feel better. You have a Butler syndrome aspect to that of just like, well, if I just serve everyone, then I'll get my attachment needs met. And well, if you have a disorganized attachment, I'm guessing you went through flat out abuse as well. And the ADHD could be a biological thing that you would have had anyway, or it could just be that you were never given a chance to really regulate emotions or to develop a super ego around your activities. And of course, anxiety can also be an outgrowth from all that. So, because sometimes we think about narcissism, borderline being on opposite ends of a spectrum, but I don't really see it that way in the way that I've been describing it. All right, next question is from Upper Tier patron Nicole, again from Atlanta. She says, can you review or react to Kevin Samuels' videos on YouTube? Kevin Samuels was a relationship coach who died recently. Do you think you could watch and react to the videos on YouTube? Okay, I'll add that to the list. I don't know who he is, but yeah, sounds interesting. I will tell you that I've got a lot of things on the list, but I do have a craving to watch things outside of the typical things that I watch, because sometimes some really interesting things can happen there. I've started to get into some of the Teal Swan stuff, which is, I think, fascinating. There's just so much there to talk about. All right, upper tier patron, anonymous upper tier patron, she asks simply, can you talk about your trip to Japan back in the day? Sure. So I was there for, I don't know, maybe a week or something, and I was with a good friend of mine who had been in Japan a lot and had learned Japanese very fluently, to the point where even though he was a white guy from North Carolina with a southern accent, he spoke such fluent Japanese that when he talked on the phone, they didn't realize he wasn't Japanese because his accent was so spot on. And he was obsessed with Japanese culture. He knew everything about it. And so he showed me around and he interpreted for me, and we did a lot of I also had a friend of mine a long-term friend of mine that lived in Osaka. And so we went there for a few days, and yeah, it was an amazing trip. There are so many things about that trip that I remember, and Japan is a fascinating place. It was simultaneously the most foreign place I've ever been to culturally and the most familiar to me. I mean, there were times when, I don't know if I was just making this up, but I just felt like I was returning home in a lot of ways. There were so many things there culturally and ceremonial wise and traditional wise that I felt was in my bones in a lot of ways. And so, or there were hints of it from my aunties and uncles and my dad and my grandparents and their siblings. I don't know. There's just certain things about being in Japan that just felt, I remember there's this one moment when, they have these onsens, right? That are these bathhouses. If you've seen Spirited Away, it's sort of inspired. The whole bath thing is sort of inspired by this. And they're extremely elaborate. If you ever have a chance in Japan to go to one of these things, it's really amazing. Some of them are the one I went to was in the middle of the city, in the middle of Tokyo, but they're often in the wilderness with hot springs and all this kind of stuff. And so, so they, what do I say? There's so many things to talk about. But I will say there was this, you're supposed to be naked, or you can be naked. Everyone's naked. So, and there's all these different pools and different things in it that they have a man side and a woman side. But I think women could go on the man side if they wanted to. Anyway, but yeah, I'm walking around naked, and I went outside, and it was late at night, and I think I'd been drinking because the bathhouse has a bar and restaurants and shops, and they have those little fish that eat the dead skin off your feet, and you could play these like carnival games, like throwing knives. It was just, and then of course they have the baths of different temperature in the mineral water, massages, and there's shopping. And anyway, so I'm in the baths section, and it's late at night, and I'm a little drunk, but not terribly. And there were these benches that were made out of like slate rock, and even though we were in Tokyo, I could see the stars. And I laid down on the slate, and it was the middle of summer, so it was, Tokyo gets pretty warm. I was just blissing out, looking up at the stars, naked under the sky, and thinking about how my DNA, half of my DNA, comes from this land, and all the experiences that my people and my ancestors must have had, and everything that they'd been through, and my long lost cousins, and I don't know, I just felt at one with Japan. So there was that moment. I'm trying to think of another moment another moment was, this is before cell phones were really a thing, and well before smartphones were, well, not well before, but anyway, it was 2007, so or 6, 5, I don't know, long time ago, geez. And I was flying to Tokyo and by myself, and I was meeting my friend who was in Tokyo, and I was going to stay with him and his host family, because he traveled to Japan so many times to teach English and whatnot that he had befriended a pretty well-to-do family that had a proper house in the middle of Tokyo. And because, homes in Tokyo are very expensive and tend to be kind of small, but they had such a large house that they had a room just for me, like a guest room for me, and a bathroom anyway. And the whole bathroom culture in Japan is amazing too, although it can also be very distressing. Like in restaurants, it'll just be like a pit, and I can't do that. I'll tell you another story that's terrible, but after this one. So I'm flying in, and I'm such a inexperienced traveler back then that I don't realize what you have to do in customs. So I land in customs, and the plan is that once I get through the baggage claim and everything, that my friend is going to be waiting for me, and then we're going to get on the train and go to Tokyo, and he's going to take me to where we're going to stay. And I don't know anything. I don't know where he's going to be. I don't know where he's staying. I don't even have his phone number. You know what I mean? Like, it was back when you had a landline, and I probably didn't even have that, because it's just like, well, it's a Japanese number. Like we just probably emailed each other, or would we have emailed back then? I don't know. I just knew he was going to be at the airport. And so I get in customs, and I'm waiting in line. It takes a long ass time, right? You get to the front, and there's a Japanese guy who can barely speak English, because why would he speak English? And seriously, I'm not being sarcastic. And so he, tries to communicate with me, and I can't really communicate to him, but I filled out that card, right? You're supposed to declare things, like if you have guns or something. At the very bottom of the card, you have to say where you're going to stay. And usually it's like a hotel or something, right? But I didn't know where I was going to stay, because my friend was going to take me there. I didn't know the address. I had no idea. And so I tell him this in English, and he doesn't really understand me. And we're trying to communicate with each other, and he's getting really pissed at me. He's getting really freaking frustrated with me. And he just explodes and waves me off and just says, "Go away," essentially, like, leave me alone, kind of a thing. And I'm like, okay. When you're in this situation, you feel like, even though you have nothing to hide, you feel like you're in trouble. You know what I mean? And I was like, okay. So he's waving me. So I just walked away, and I go to the very back of the line, and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? I don't know the address. I don't have a cell phone. I can't. I mean, I probably had a cell phone, but not roaming. I didn't. Anyway, point is if you're old enough like me, you remember there a time when you just literally had no way to contact anyone. So I'm sitting there going, what do I do? Like, I have no options. Even if I got to a payphone, I don't know what number to call. I don't even know the number convention in Japan's system. Like, what area codes do you, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. And I can't find anyone to talk to, of course. And I don't know the address, and I tried to explain it to the guy, and he's not going to let me into the country. And I'm in this limbo zone in customs, right? Because when you're in customs, you're in this kind of smallish area. You're not in the main area of the airport, right? and I don't have my bag because I haven't gone through custom, so, or maybe I do have my bag anyway. And so I'm panicking, I'm sweating, and it's late at night, and I've been on a very long airplane ride, right, from like halfway across the world. And so this part of me just kind of kicks in, which is a part of me that I don't like following rules. And so I find a pamphlet that has this random address on it. I don't even know what it is. Is it a hotel? Is it just a random office building? And I write down an address, not the exact address, but close. Like it was like I switched a couple numbers. Because the other thing is, like, I don't even know how addresses work in Japan, right? Because it's a totally different lettering system, right? So I copy the convention of that into that space on the customs card, and I get in a different line. So I get to a different officer. I give them the card and my passport, and I am crapping bricks at this point, and they just waved me forward, and I got in the country. And I just think, now, if you're an expert on this, you're probably like, custom agents, they don't care. They're not looking at that. It's not really the crucial part of that process. You just need to say you're going somewhere. It's just checking a box. But I didn't know that. I didn't know anything. I just thought I'm going to end up in jail or something. Or this is going to take so long that my friend will go home, and then even if I do get through customs, he'll be long gone, and then what do I do? I don't even know. I don't know how to call him. What do I just wait at the airport for hours? There's a huge airport. Anyway. Okay, so there's so many stories that are popping in my head. Another story, a very brief one, is we met up. So I met up with two of my friends. One friend of mine from college, he was living in Japan, teaching English, and was in Osaka. And then my other friend, so they're two white guys, two just pasty white guys. And I'm half Japanese. We walk into this, we're drinking late at night, and we're roaming around sort of a random part of Osaka. And we find that we're like, oh, we should try to get another drink. We try to find a bar, and we see this restaurant that has a bar, and a very small. A lot of restaurant bars in Japan are very small, like 10 people can sit there. You know what I mean? And so we find one of those places, and we kind of bumble in, and there's some regulars at the bar. It looks like, anyway, and the bartender sees us walk in, two white guys and maybe another white guy, and says, oh, no, we're closed, in English to us. No, we're closed. Well, my friends speak Japanese. I don't. So they speak back in Japanese to be like, are you sure? It doesn't look like you're closed. And no, we're closed. Even though it's early enough that they wouldn't be closed, even though on the door it says they're not closed, even though there's customers being served in this place. And we walk out, and I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. And my two friends are like, oh, that's racism in Japan. I don't know if that's true now, but it was back then. That it's like, 2.5 white guys walk into a small bar, and they don't serve our kind there. Now, on one hand, that's massively racist, right? Like, imagine if you're an American restaurant owner and you see 3 Japanese guys walk in, and you're like, no, we don't serve your kind, we're closed. That's just massively racist, right? On the other hand, there are a lot of drunk white guys that, so there's so many things to say about Japan. Japan, from day one, not entirely, but for the most part, you are socialized on average to be polite to everybody. It extends into society such that on the subway or the bus, no one bothers anyone. No one is listening to their phone on speaker. This is, 20 years ago almost, but so maybe it's different now, but it's an extremely polite society. Are there impolite people? Yes. Are there Japanese assholes? Yes. Take it from me. Yes. So it's not like Japanese people are nice, but there's just a lot of shame around sticking out. And so there's all this politeness. And so and Westerners, particularly Americans, particularly drunk young men, white guys, are obnoxious because of the way we're socialized, right? And so when we walk into a bar, they know what's going to happen. We're going to ruin it for everybody. And so you could say it's justified to kick us out. Anyway, final story. There's probably a billion other stories I could say about Japan, but this one is shocking. And it's a trigger warning that this is going to involve child sexual abuse. So if you don't want to listen to that, which it could be highly triggering to you. So I would skip forward about 5 minutes or something. So briefly, we're walking down a busy part of Tokyo, and my friend, who knows everything about Japan, he looks up at this sign and he says, "You see what it says?" And I was beginning to be able to read Japanese because he was teaching me, and I said, "Oh, it says Imoya, which is potato store," and it has this like cutesy anime girl, and he's like, "Do you know what that is?" I'm like, "No," and cutesy anime girls are everywhere. And I also want to tell you the story about the maids, what do you call it, the maid tea rooms or something. Anyway, that was a whole other trip. But he says, "Imoya," he's like, "Let's go up there. Let's go." So we go in, and a lot of the stores in Tokyo are very small, and they might even be just anyway. So we go up this tight elevator, which would freak me out, like fourth floor or something. We emerge on this very, very tiny floor. The building is very thin, and walk into the store, and he's just kind of looking at me, and he's like, "Okay, I'm just gonna watch your face as we go into the store," because he wants to see my reaction to it. And I'm like, "Okay, what am I looking at?" And it's just a tiny little store, and all the merchandise is on the wall, and there's an island in the middle of merchandise, and there's like videotapes and magazines and little figurines and stuff, and I'm looking, and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? It seems like kind of like a kid's store or a teenage store or something. And then all of a sudden it dawns on me that this is a child pornography store in the middle of Tokyo, open to the public. And I'm like, what is happening? And not only that, but each corner of this tiny little store, think of it, the store was like a large bedroom kind of thing, you know? And each corner had a different age group. I'm not even joking. So there was the preschool age child porn, and it wasn't overt child porn in terms of what was on display. It was like soft, like kids in bikinis jumping around, but it was clearly inappropriate. You know what I mean? It was not okay. And then there would be the tweens, and then there was the teen. You know, it was simultaneously the worst, most disturbing experience I've ever had in my life, and also the most fascinating, because there were customers coming in and out. No one was ashamed. And the store owner was standing there like a clerk in a bookstore, just like, "Hey, welcome to my store." And I was shocked. And so some of that stuff is burned in my brain. I can see, there was this one videotape playing, and there were these two young kids frolicking in a bikini with a sprinkler or something like that. And it's just horrible. You think about those kids, right? You just think like, where are those kids, and how are they doing, you know? So we walk out, and I ask my friend, who is pretty knowledgeable about these things, I'm like, "So child porn isn't illegal in Japan?" He's like, "Oh, no, it's terribly illegal." I was like, "Well, so how does that store exist?" He's like, "Because people are so shame-based in Japan that no one wants to look at it. Everyone knows it's there, but it's shameful to look at and acknowledge, so no one wants to blow the whistle." Now, it's 2022 in Tokyo right now. Maybe they've cleaned that up. I don't know. But this wasn't that long ago. You know, this was not long ago. Did that ever exist in the United States? Did we have just like a legit business that had that kind of retail? Has that ever existed in our country, even when things were pretty bad in our country? Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, the amount, and there's a whole discussion about, my wife modeled in Japan quite a lot, and there's so many perverts and sexual predators just roaming the subways, and I don't know if there's a higher prevalence of that crime happening in Japan as opposed to the United States, but it's so prevalent. You can buy used panties in vending machines just on the side of the sidewalk. Anyway, so yeah, sorry for telling you that story. That's pretty awful and upsetting. Imo-ya, potato store. In Kyoto, they have very cute tame deer that will come, was it Kyoto? That you can feed, and the little deer will be your friends. But when they find out that you have food, because you buy these little packets of food for them, they start to bite you. And there's a picture of these deer biting my ass, literally on my butt, trying to alert me to give them crackers. What's another story from Japan? Oh, well, I'll end with another, creepy story, but a lot less bothersome. So many of you probably know that there's this maid culture in Japan, and I don't know exactly how to describe it, but essentially there are these I don't know what to call them, like little bars or coffee houses or tea houses that are, the workers there are young women dressed up in like French maid outfits, but they don't show any skin. They are very proper French maid outfits, if that makes any sense. Like they go all the way up to the neck. Now they have stockings on, and you might be able to see like their knee or something, but it's considered to be, I don't know how Japanese guys see it, but what happens is that, I don't know if it's lonely guys. It's sort of like their version of Hooters. You know what I mean? Like in the United States, that it's not disgraceful for a group of guys after work, or even one guy after work, to go to Hooters and have a meal and a drink, and also enjoy the company of a waitress who is attractive. And so in Japan, their Hooters are these maid cafes. That's what they're called, maid cafes. And the maids treat the men customers like when you walk in, they call you master. like you're the man of the house or something, and they praise you, and they laugh at all your dumb jokes, and they ask you about your career, and you're so fascinating. And it's all just to get tips and to make money. Now, I don't know. Some of the maids seemed like they might kind of like their jobs a little bit, just the same way that I'm sure some Hooters people really like their jobs. So it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't pleasant. Because my friend was like, "Oh, we got to go in one of these," because we walked by one. He's like, "We got to go." And I'm like, "What are these things?" And the other thing was about this. Okay, I'll end with the story. Was there? You could get foot massages, so, and other kinds of massage or something, right? And maybe it goes beyond that. I don't know, but I was, I'm an adventurous person, so I'm like, oh, okay, when in Rome. And, I like a good foot massage. What's the harm in that? So me and my friend, we sign up. We go to one of these maid cafes, and I'm just fascinated, And because I don't speak Japanese, the maids are trying to talk to me, and I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying. So, but I could kind of tell by context what was happening on the other tables around me with the other Japanese guys. Anyway, so I am like, well, foot massage. And the other thing was my feet were killing me, because you walk everywhere when you're in Japan, right? Because you can. So I had blisters on my feet. Like, I remember my feet were in a lot of pain. So, this would be good. So I signed up for like a 45-minute foot massage, which was a big mistake looking back. So I sit down, she does not speak any English, like, at all. So, but my friend can speak Japanese. But anyway, so she starts to give me a foot massage, but my friend isn't in the room with us, so we can't communicate with each other. This small girl in the maid outfit had the strongest hands I have. She's like the Hulk of hands. She went to town on my feet, and it was so painful. Like, it was excruciating pain. I was sweating with how much pain it was. But one, I couldn't communicate to her, and two, I didn't want to make her feel bad. And three, I thought, well, maybe this is some sort of special therapy that my feet will be better at, because my feet are in a lot of pain. So maybe this is, but so if it was 45 minutes of the most painful, I've never given birth before, but I'm just going to take a guess and say it was on that spectrum. It was exquisite. It was so painful. I think I saw stars while she was digging into my feet. And when it was over, so at some point, no. Okay. So then, afterwards or during or something, she says something in Japanese, and my friend understands it. And we're walking out, so we're walking out, and I'm like, I don't know if that actually helped, because it did help a little bit. Like, my feet didn't hurt in the same way, but then I wondered if she just masked my original pain with a new, more exquisite pain. Anyway, but my friend says, you know what she said? She said, normally men will say that her technique is too painful, and then she will tone it down. But with you took it like a champ. And I'm like, God damn it. I should have said something, because it was miserable. But, then I wouldn't have a story to tell y'all. All right, well, it's almost midnight. And those are my very unrefined, terrible, terrible stories from Japan, full of misogyny, probably some mild racism in there, oppression of women, just awful. But you asked, anonymous up at your patron, you asked, and that's what you get. Why did you ask that question? No one's ever asked me that question before. All right. Well, what are your experiences of Japan? Let me know. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.